Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am excited to be here with you today for Power Moves Navigating Finance as Women Leaders, and this is hosted by Zone. This is going to be a real conversation. So, no buzzwords, no fluff, just an honest look at what leadership actually feels like as a woman in the industry when you might be the only woman in the room or even the only woman on the team. So, with that said, we're going to kick things off with a few quick intros. I will get us started. I am Haley Ash. I am head of customer marketing and communications here at Zone & Co., and I will be your host today. And I am thrilled to be joined by two amazing women in finance leadership, Vicki Devens, VP of FP&A at Klaviyo, and Dacine Sterling, financial controller at Sourcegraph. So with that said, Vicki, can you give us a quick intro and then we'll pass it over to Dacine?
Yeah, sure. So happy to be here. As Haley mentioned, I work for Klaviyo. I've been leading the FP&A team here for about 2 years. Prior to that, I worked at GE. I had the opportunity to cover most of their different business, different industries, jobs. I was there for over 15 years. And I'm based out of the Boston area. I have 3 kids outside of work, so busy with that as well. And I'm glad to be here, as I mentioned.
Hi, I'm Dacine. I'm the controller at Sourcegraph. I've been leading the team here for about 3.5 years. Prior to Sourcegraph, I was at various companies, public, private, primarily in the software field. And I have 2 kids outside of Sourcegraph.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. And just to set the stage, before we get diving into everything else, Zone recently published our 2025 Women in Finance Compensation Report. So that's really one of the drivers of what spurred us to have this conversation today as well. So we just dropped that in the chat. And it is also available in the resource center of this webinar. It's based on responses from 109 women across the industry. Some are Zone customers, some from some of our partnerships with associations like Wednesday Women and Females in Finance Collective, and some just found the survey on LinkedIn and decided to participate. And the findings were really eye-opening. For example, women working at smaller firms tend to climb the ladder faster, we found, and often report longer hours and lower satisfaction. Meanwhile, women in software are seeing some of the highest compensation, with almost half reporting total compensation above 250K, including base, bonus, and equity. So a lot of interesting findings. So I'd encourage everybody to be sure to check out the report. With that said, today's conversation is a chance to go even deeper into that. So we'll talk about what it really means to be a woman in finance right now, what's working, what's still challenging, and what leadership really looks like behind the scenes. Okay. So now that we've done all those quick intros, let's shift into what I like to call the leadership journey section of this panel. And this is one of my favorite questions to ask because no two stories are ever the same, right? And there's so much power in hearing the real path, not just the highlights, but the pivots, surprises, and values that guided the way. So let's start here. And Dacine, I'm going to start with you. How did you find your way into finance and more specifically into leadership?
I found my way into finance because I'm just super drawn to solving problems, I think is what it is. I really like bringing order to chaos, and finance in the startup world is so much that for me. And I really like that so much of the work that I'm doing is driving decisions based on the data that we're giving. And specifically in leadership, I didn't really set out to be a leader. I would say it just has evolved. In my industry, having experience bringing the order from the chaos and building out a function is like a really valuable skill. And you mentioned that in a smaller company, you tend to move up faster. And I think that like in tech, in the startup world, having seen and done the things that I've done, you get pulled in leadership roles a lot sooner.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love you saying that you're being drawn into finance and those decisions sooner. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Vicki, would love to hear your story and what path brought you into finance and leadership.
Yeah, sure. So when I was little, I really liked to play store. I think it was the idea of, running a business, understanding how businesses create value, how they make money, how they interact with customers. So I think that was kind of very early years, like had me kind of thinking about that in the background. Fast forward to high school, college, I'd say again, really liked math and numbers much more than writing. I think I dreaded any time I had to write anything. And the more I learned about different types of finance roles, for me, I kind of knew I didn't want to do iBanking. And so it was a lot about, okay, well, what else in finance is there? And the more I started to talk to people who were in different companies, hearing that finance was really could be a business partner. And again, what Dacine talked about in terms of adding value by kind of organizing data and driving insights and using data to drive decision making really appealed to me. I would say I did always kind of have a vision for being in a leadership role, but it was probably more about the impact and like having a seat at the table versus like a title or a role. And so, I guess it was there, but maybe in a different non-traditional way. And I think one thing that I've really flipped for me in recent years is that I used to kind of think about the impact being correlated to the size of the company I was at. And when I moved to Klaviyo from GE, which is obviously very big, it really flipped that narrative for me. And I actually feel that I'm able to have even more of an impact in a smaller company. You move incredibly fast. You're able to make decisions and run with them. You're able to see change much faster. And so I've really enjoyed being, in a different environment where the leadership impact you have is actually quite different, even if it's in a smaller scale. So pros and cons of both, though, for sure.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Vicky. And first of all, I love the image of you playing store as a kid. And that's some of your early start to that, and your understanding for how business work clearly stuck with you. And really what struck me with your story is clarity you had around impact. Not necessarily chasing a title, but being drawn to the kind of leadership that lets you influence and shape business, and more specifically, your experience with Klaviyo, flipping that narrative on company size is such great insight. So thank you. And I think both of your stories highlight something really important here. And there's no one right way into leadership, right? Whether you're building your way into it, like Dacine, or growing into it with intention, kind of like Vicky shared, what matters most is the impact you're making along the way. So with that said, let's keep going. I want to talk next about the reality of what it feels like to lead, especially in environments where you may be the only woman in the room. So let's get started with our first kind of questions here. So titles aside, there's a whole experience that comes with leadership when you're the only. And that's something so many of us in this room might have even faced. So a 2024 McKinsey report found that just 40% of leadership roles are held by women. And when women are in those roles, they're often the only woman in the room. At the current pace, it'll take 22 years for white women to reach leadership parity, and more than twice as long for women of color. So, Vicky, we're going to start with you on this one. Have you experienced this dynamic, and how have you learned to lead through it?
Yeah, so I would say earlier in my career, I think when you're first kind of growing up in finance, I actually found that it was we're kind of at parity in terms of gender diversity. I would say the longer I've been in the function and grown in the function is where I've kind of seen it fall off. I think specifically when I worked at GE, I saw that there were certain kind of inflection points in your career where at times I would see peer females of mine kind of decide to lean out. And some of it was very intentional of, hey, I want to have a little bit more balance in my life. This isn't something I'm enjoying doing, et cetera. I want to do some other things. But other times I felt like it was actually them leaning out because of a lack of confidence, which wasn't kind of ideally what you want. So I think it's been something that is certainly been in the back of my mind, is just understanding that sometimes, again, the lack of parity at more senior roles is intentional because or is okay because females are picking that, but it's the other group of making sure people feel the confidence that they can do they can do it. It's just a matter of if they want to do it, and making sure that's the reason they choose and not, self-selecting themselves out, I would say.
Yeah, I love how you put that, self-selecting yourself out. That's a great way to put it. Thank you for that. And what about you? Have you felt this, and how have you had to lead through it?
Absolutely. I would say in the vast majority of my roles, it's been very male dominated at the top. My managers have always been men. Prior controllers have always been men. And I think for me, I always felt like I had to lead like they led, whether that's to be very like commanding in a room or very loud in a room. And that's just not my style. So I always felt like sort of at odds if like, how can I be that successful if I can't be like that? And what's been really helpful for me is just like embracing that I lead differently. I am more emotionally connected to my teammates. I may not be the loudest in the room, but I work to get my voice heard in other ways. I form really tight business partnerships across the org instead of maybe being like the best presenter in the room and leaning into just that I am different and that's okay. And it's helpful for me.
Love that. And yes to letting go of the styles that don't fit,
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful way to lead, not by mimicking, but by owning your approach. So I love that. Let's talk about mentorship next. In our Women in Finance compensation report that we did, just 13% of VPs and 17% of controllers said that they had strong access to membership. Desine, let's start with you for this one. What does membership look like for you now at this stage in your career?
I feel like I've been so lucky to have good mentors my whole career. I think that I don't know, unconsciously have sought out women just because I want to get that sort of experience from them. Mentorship for me now, I think, is much more about looking to my mentors as peers as opposed to like looking up. I find that as my career has grown, I can talk to my mentors now and say, hey, what are you doing in this situation? The environment is changing. How are you handling XYZ? And that's been super helpful for me.
Love that. And, the idea of leaning on mentors in that way, not just for big career moves, always even too, is such a good takeaway. Vicky, how about you?
Yeah, similar to Dacine, I think was always kind of told early on, yeah, try to mentorship, I think sounds like a very scary thing, but it can be just a peer, it can be a manager that you got along with, it can be somebody that is below you, it can be a family member, right? It can be so many different shapes and sizes. I think I have been intentional about trying to pair myself up with folks that have different styles that I actually feel uncomfortable with or feel like they can push me on an area that I'm not as comfortable on. For example, like Desi mentioned, I don't love public speaking. So talking to someone and like getting advice and coaching from somebody that's really good in that area, I think is a good way to do it. And I think about it as, you're going to have mentors for different points in time in your career and life journey. I also have heard, I'm sure many of you have heard about the whole analogy of like having a board of directors and thinking about, that's more of like a long-term view of certain mentors are going to almost elevate to that level of, I think about that are going to help see you over time, right? Whereas some mentors might be, hey, I need some help coaching on this area for 3 to 6 months. A board of directors, I would say, is like my parents, right? It's, a manager that I've worked with for a long period of time. It could be someone who gave me really tough feedback. And so to me, that's the important piece of that, like the length as well.
I really like the idea of having somebody as a mentor that has been tough on you historically, because
Yeah.
there's people that see your flaws like that.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. And it's
Yeah.
also sometimes uncomfortable to ask, but I think if you can kind of just get over it. And I think the other thing is if to be a good mentee means preparation for those discussions, right? Making sure you go in with an agenda of what you hope to get out of it and hopefully teach them something too. So it's mutually beneficial.
Love that. And I just have to say, on the note of public speaking, I appreciate your mentors that have guided that and that you're here with us today and you're doing this webinar with us, both of you. So thank you for sharing that on mentorship. And the last kind of question in this particular section I want to ask both of you, and you've already both touched on it a little bit, but what does it mean to each of you to be a working mom in today's world, especially in the world of finance? And Vicki, I'll let you start with that one.
I would say it's just the idea of ruthless prioritization. And it's not just, I think, whether you're a working mom. I mean, it's just in general, everybody has a lot of roles to juggle. I think about, being a mom, a sister, a friend, manager, an employee, right? Like just all the different roles. I think it makes me better from a time management perspective and trying to compartmentalize different parts of your life is hard, but it also pushes you to be very efficient. I think it's never a perfect balance. And yeah, you're a lot of days where you feel like you're kind of failing at something or, but it also makes you better. And I wouldn't have it any other way to, not have like that, the well-balanced and the very diverse set of experiences. And I think it makes me a better leader too, because I'm able to connect more personally with my teams and, appreciate that work is just a piece of, it's the 8 or so hours you spend during the day, but there's 16 other hours that you don't see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the phrase you used, ruthless prioritization. I think that's such a simple but real way to say it. And I love the reminder that boundaries can make us better, not lesser leaders. So I think that's an important thing to focus on too. So thank you for that. Justine, what are your thoughts?
All of what Vicky said, for sure. I feel like you have such you have limited time and you have to prioritize everything so much differently when you have a much bigger life outside. Like your work is not your whole life. And I think ever since having kids too, I've become so much more empathetic to that. Before I felt like, why can't you do this? Or like, yes, it's 5 o'clock, but this still needs to get done. And getting an insight that like people have so much more going on outside of work has, I think, made me a better leader, that I can connect better across the org. I also think that finance, accounting, and tech like are not known for being great about work-life balance. And I have had to set boundaries for myself, and I'm very clear with my team that I expect them to set boundaries, because I think when you don't, that's when you kind of run into this issue of like, oh, I'm so burnt out. I don't have time for this. So just being very clear about what you can and can't do up front.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And I think it's so important to normalize being both a mom and a leader, to your point, especially in the financial and software space. And I think that kind of openness that you're setting really sets the tone for everybody watching today too. So thank you both for sharing some of that. So, our next section, our next part of our conversation is where we're going to talk about shifting this narrative and what needs to shift to support more women stepping into leadership. So, we've talked a little bit about what it's like to lead today, the challenges of being the only, and how you both navigated mentorship and motherhood along the way. But I also want to take a moment to talk about what's changing. So, Dacine, starting with you, what signs of progress are you seeing in the industry, and how do you think the narrative around what it means to be a female leader in finance is starting to shift?
I think there's been a ton of progress. And for me, I think the biggest sign of progress is the flexibility. 10 years ago, you would go into the office at 8, leave at 6, and like you were there all the time. If you had to be out for a couple hours, you had to go, like it was an ordeal. Now you can work from home, you can have a hybrid schedule. It allows you to volunteer at school for an hour, make those doctor's appointments, and it just makes being able to be in the workforce and succeed as a woman so much more flexible. I don't feel like I have everything is a trade-off for me. I'm able to do all of the things that I want to do.
Love that. Love that. And I think it's so important to hone in on the fact and the idea that like we don't have to fit into the old school model anymore.
Yep.
It's really powerful. And just the fact that conversations around burnout and boundaries and support are happening, that is meaningful progress. Vicky, how about you? What changes are you seeing, and how do you think the narrative is evolving?
Yeah, I would say definitely echo everything Dacine said in terms of like the actual scheduling flexibility, the idea that FaceTime doesn't matter the way it used to, and that, you get your work done. It's the output, not the hours, is massive. I'd say the other thing for me, I think I moved from GE, very different industries to SaaS, and I think that also to me shows a different level of openness in terms of like progress. I would assume and had seen in, years ago that you were in an industry for life, right? You were, born and raised and grew up, and wasn't a lot of openness to take a risk on somebody who didn't know that area or didn't know that role. I think a lot more discussions around it the get the right talent, and if they can learn, then you can throw them into any role or any company or any industry. So to me, different from the, maybe gender diversity progress, but I feel like it's part of also just the evolving way that people are looking at talent. And I also think it's especially important for women who sometimes don't again, back to that self-selecting yourself out. If you don't know that area or you're not an expertise, I think now people are being much more open, and it's just up to us to kind of raise our hand and put our name in the hat, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really appreciate the point that you made of being open to nonlinear paths, taking bets on potential and leadership style over just past experience. I think that mindset shift really can open doors. And I believe you shared too when we were chatting previously that in your current role, you have a female CFO, right? And about 50% of your leadership team is female too, right? So yeah, I think that's no small thing. So
Yeah, she does such a good job of not just like the idea of being out of the office, but then talking about why she's out of the office. Like, hey, I was out because I was prioritizing this for my kids or this for my family. And I think that's also important, is to normalize it as opposed to just hide and do it on the, you know? So yeah,
yeah, yeah,
really, really respect her.
absolutely. That's no small thing. So I appreciate you sharing that and appreciate both of you sharing your perspectives. It's clear that while there is probably more work to be done, the narrative is starting to change though. Clearly, with Klaviyo as an example and SourceGraph as an example, and it's being shaped by leaders like both of you who are showing up really authentically, I think, and creating space for others to do the same. So we're going to head into our final section ahead of Q&A. So that said, I will just have a quick little plug. If you do have any questions, go ahead and feel free to start popping them in our Q&A now or in the chat. But for our final section, I want to close with something forward-looking, and that is advice for the next generation of women in finance. So whether someone is just getting started in their career or stepping into their first leadership role, I know so many people in this audience might be looking for practical guidance, bold encouragement, even, and just real talk here of what we're talking about. So let's start with that. Vicky, what is one thing you wish someone would have told you 10 years ago to better prepare you for where you are today?
Yeah, the phrase that always sticks with me is the idea of get comfortable being uncomfortable. The idea that the minute you're an expert or you're comfortable about an area, like it means you got to move on and you got to reach for the next stretch assignment. So that's something that just understanding that it feels awful at the time, but it means you're growing, and like to recognize that and lean into it, I would say.
Yeah, love that. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm gonna put that on a sticky note and make it where I can see it all the time. Such a great mindset. And I think the discomfort just changes form as you grow, even too, but it never really goes away. So that's a good thing. And how about you? What do you wish someone had told you earlier in your journey?
How much you need to advocate for yourself. And I think where this resonates the most for me is I always thought that if I work really hard, people are going to recognize it and that's how I'll succeed. And that's not always the case. You have to show your work. You have to speak up about your wins and you have to ask for what you want and say, hey, here's why I deserve this, because no one really watches out for you like you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Advocating for yourself, so important. Another sticky note to keep up above my computer. I think it's such an underrated skill too, especially when you are a high performer, who might assume the work will speak for itself, but your point about making your wins more visible is a great reminder too. Next question. What's a power move you have made, something bold or maybe even risky at the time, but that ended up shifting your path or opening doors? Let's start with you for that one.
Sure. Early in my career, I was at a very established public company and I felt like that was the way to go. Like you want the stability, you want the larger company. And I left and I joined a super scrappy startup and there was two of us on the accounting team and I learned so much and that changed my entire career trajectory. Like ever since then, I've been so startup focused and I found that's what I actually enjoy doing. It's not just going through the motions in a larger company, it's the building. Yeah, definitely taking that risk.
Love that. Such a great one. Such a great one. Vicky, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I would say I was at one point asked to take a role outside of finance. I was working in a very traditional FP&A role, and they asked me to move into a sales operations role. and it was kind of going from one end of the spectrum to the other in terms of FP&A being very calendar driven, deliverable driven, very much like you know what you're supposed to do and when, to a role that didn't even exist. I was the first one in it. It was white space. I had to build out a team. I had to build out priorities. Just basically kind of the world was my oyster. It was, again, very uncomfortable, but I learned a ton. I think the biggest thing for me was it gave me a lot of empathy of how hard it was to actually go drive change and drive the numbers. Whereas when you're in, finance and FP&A specifically, it's very easy to, give a target out there. The other side of the coin of like, what does it take to actually make the number? It just gave me a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding of how important it is to be able to influence and drive outcomes as opposed to just kind of report the news. So yeah, at the time, very uncomfortable. Didn't even want to take the role, was kind of told I had to take it. But I look back and it was like a total game changer for me.
And I think you shared you're reporting into the CEO as well in that position, right?
Yeah,
Wow.
who, was very strict, tough German man. So again, was not a very comfortable spot to take, but like Dacine said, I think the idea of taking the risk and realizing that nothing's permanent. So, hey, what's the worst case? I try it out for a couple of months, I don't like it, and I can do something else. Or best case, you do enjoy it and you learn a lot.
Yeah, no, I love that. Leaving a structured FP&A role to step into more of a white space function and reporting to the CEO, nonetheless, that's a leap. But the way you framed it, I think empathy, gray space, influence without authority, all of that, those are great career accelerators and I'm sure have been invaluable for you to take along the rest of your career. All right, one last question, and I think this one is something for our audience to really take away with them today. What is one bold step someone can take this week to lead more intentionally? Vicki, we'll go back to you for this one.
Sure, I would say just speak up with whether it's questions or opinions, whether it's in a meeting with just one person, whether it's in a group meeting, whether it's in a all employee town hall, you name it. I think it's back to if that's uncomfortable, practice being comfortable. And also a little bit of what Dacine mentioned earlier around, the idea that you have to kind of do a little bit of self-promotion. It's important, right? That idea of being visible and, there is some of that you just have to be aware of is part of being a leader and growing your career. So it's important to take those risks.
Yeah, such a great one. Speaking up, whether it's a question or a point of view, showing up with intention in a meeting is such a great muscle to build. Dacine, why don't you bring us home? What is your step up suggestion?
Mine is to ask for feedback. I think that we look to our managers a lot for feedback because review cycle, if it's coming from our manager, that's kind of who decides our career a lot, or our role at a lot of companies. But asking for feedback from your directs and your peers, they work with you so much more than your manager. They're going to see things your manager doesn't see. I also think that when you're vulnerable and you're asking for, hey, your feedback, good or bad, like create a safe space for it, obviously. It shows that you value their opinion, that you're not just there to lead or for your directs, and that you want to change how you interact with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think asking for feedback, especially from peers or direct reports, is powerful. And, it shows humility and openness and a real investment in your growth. So that kind of vulnerability is great leadership. Well, thank you both. What a powerful way to close out the panel. I love both of those answers, or really all of your answers in this section. I know this was one of the sections I was looking forward to most. So I think you both have done a really great job of advocating for yourself and speaking up and getting uncomfortable on purpose. So you've given us all a lot to think about and act on. So that said, I know the Q&A seems like it has been blowing up. So let's open it up now for questions from the audience, if that's all right with both of you. So again, if you have other questions as we go, feel free to drop them in. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with our first question. And ladies, Vicki and Dacine, feel free to just pick whoever wants to get started answering this first one. But our first question is, what strategies have helped you build financial confidence in high stakes leadership decisions?
I can take it. Having the data to support what my opinion on anything is probably what gives me the most confidence. I mean, that and like having gone through it a lot, you just feel more comfortable. But I feel like if I'm going into a decision and I'm giving my opinion, if I don't have supporting facts for why I have that opinion, I have no confidence. And I would expect everyone in the room to not be confident in my opinion. So doing my homework ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And I can say it's a similar feeling on the marketing side of the house too. So I think having numbers and data to support everything that you're saying and really back it up is an important thing. Vicky, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I'd say that the data, and then also just that idea of like, think about who's going to be the most opposed to a certain decision, opposed to the decision, or tell you the data is wrong, or, there's always going to be the the naysayers. So how do you think about how you'll position against those, or how you'll be ready to answer some of those questions? Because the challenges will always come. And unfortunately, we all know in finance, the data is never perfect and it never will be. So
Yeah,
it's just always be ready.
yeah, yeah, and I love that. Michelle in the chat just put love that thinking one step ahead of the naysayers and completely agree. That's a great perspective. Next question, really good one here. What single piece of advice would you give to any woman who or any women who are looking to elevate their careers, gain confidence, and become a strong leader?
I think similar to how I had answered one of the first questions is really just like lean into your leadership style. The more authentically you can be and that you're not faking it, you're going to be more confident. You're going to be more secure in how you go into all aspects of your role.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the imposter syndrome is real, and I think it's easy to look at, not to stereotype, but men who are louder, who appear like they know everything, who again, you read the studies where they apply for the job that they have minimal qualifications for, females apply for the jobs that they match every single qualification for. So I think it's just like knowing that if that's something you struggle with, that you just have to kind of be aware and always fight that battle and try to be as true to yourself as possible in terms of your leadership style, the way you go across, the way you interact. And yeah, same as Dacine said.
Yeah, yeah, no, love both of those answers. All right, the next question, and I know this resonates very much with me too. I know many women who struggle with making mistakes, even though we are all aware that it is part of learning. But what would you say are some ways you overcame missteps to continue to grow, as you did have any missteps along the way?
I feel like I almost have like a postmortem with myself when I've had a mistake, like when I made a mistake. And I think that this is definitely a me personality quirk, but I will rehash the mistake over and over and over more than I need to. So doing it at least in an organized way where I can say like, here's the mistake, here's how, like knowing why I made the mistake is super helpful because I can like lock that away and not do it again. And just telling myself like, it is okay. Like you've learned from it, you know why it happened, you know how to not repeat it, and you can like put it to rest now.
Love that. Love that. And I agree. I'll just share some of my perspective too. I feel like it's almost like a taking a mistake and making it a positive thing.
Yeah.
So, like, always seeing a learning moment from it. Like, that's how, even when I've had direct reports that have made a mistake, I'm like, just, we're going to look at this positively. This is a learning moment, and most likely you're never going to make this mistake again. So, I 100% agree with that outlook and perspective. Any thoughts from your side, Vicky?
Yeah, it's hard not to beat yourself up over it or over fixate on, you know, that it happened. It's kind of just like, okay, it happened, now what? And really what people remember is how you react to it. So just trying to really not spend, do the proper reflection and figure out what you can learn, but then it's move forward and get past it, because guarantee you're the one who's holding on to it much more than anyone else.
Yeah, that's a great reminder to just not hold on to it so long, not beat yourself up. I think that's a great reminder for all of us listening. Next question is from Lacey. How do you define success for yourself now versus earlier in your career?
For me, I would say, I think, when I started off, it was more about, the promotion or the title or kind of like getting to that next level, whatever that level was. Now I think it's like that constant check-in of, am I learning? Am I making an impact? Am I feeling like I'm having a voice and like influencing the direction of the company? And back to the, hey, because you're juggling this with so many other balls in terms of your personal life, if you're not enjoying it the majority of the time, I'm not going to say every day is sunshine and rainbows, but if you're not enjoying it majority of the time, you got to really reevaluate. So yeah, I think it's much more about like the personal fulfillment versus the seeking that title.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that does kind of go back to one of the things we touched on earlier of the amount of time that we spend working too. So I think adding in the element of making sure you enjoy it and that kind of being a baseline too is an important reminder. So, how about you, Dacine?
So similar. I totally viewed it as check boxes. Am I doing this? Am I moving up here? And now that I have the knowledge that my time is much more finite, it's much more about fulfillment for me. Like, am I learning? Am I growing? Am I making an impact?
Yeah, yeah. And Kimberly just put a great note in the chat, and she's worked on many executive teams where she was the only female, and often when there is a meeting or trip, she might not be invited because of the boys want to golf together. So one of the questions she asked with this is, have either of you experienced this, and how did you handle it? Just this, you mentioned this is tough because these can be recreational activities. So how do you help develop deeper relationships in that regard?
Yeah. I think it still happens, right? It stings when it happens, when you feel like you didn't get invited or didn't even if you don't want to go, you just want to get asked to go. It's kind of the thing I always struggle with. I would say a lot of the times, I think it's like unconscious bias that they do it. And I think sometimes it might just be the idea of like kind of mentioning, hey, heard you guys went golfing. Next time, like, I'd love to meet you afterwards, or like, hey, let me know, I'll go do this, or hey, what if we go for a walk next time? I don't know, shopping. I'm not saying that that's probably a common activity, but I just think, I really think it's like they just don't think, and it's really not intentional. So trying to just almost like frame it as a, hey, next time could you think about it a little more, because I would opt to go. And then, yeah, if they do invite you, maybe you don't want to actually go play golf, but you figure out a way to pop in for some of the experience or whatever the session is. Or again, think of something that would be more gender friendly, if the more people would want to be in, gender and age friendly, right? So
Yeah, yeah, well, that's great. Any thoughts from your side, Dacine, on that one?
I just want to say I agree that it does sting, but I in the vast majority of cases, I don't think it's intentional. But when you do get the invite, I do think it's so important to go. I think that there is something to be said for outside of getting to know somebody outside of work that makes it easier for you to do your job at work. So if you don't like golf, maybe try to like golf for a day.
I like Laura's example of going to the country club and reading. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, you still join for dinner after. It's awesome because you showed up and you get to know somebody outside of work. And it definitely makes influencing at work then more easy.
Love that. Love that. Great answers. Great answers all around. And great question, Kimberly. Another question. What's one thing you think we should know about that we maybe did not cover today?
I would say compensation is a tough conversation to have. I think as a female, sometimes I've struggled to ask for that promotion or kind of, push back if I think, the dollars being offered aren't enough. But I think you really have to, again, like fight for what you want and know that what's the harm in asking? And you can do it in a way that's respectful, or you can do it in a way that's, very tone deaf, right? And so if you can do it nice, if you can do it in a way that's confident and, factual and not emotional, it's always the right thing to do. Always, always, always ask.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I guess from my side, I would love to know like how do you prepare for that? Like how do you get ready to go into the room and have that conversation? What are the things that you typically do to get ready for that?
I think this is a great way to use your mentors, especially ones that maybe have managed you in the past or are the ones that are a little tougher on you. Role play it out with them, like how you would ask, what they would say to you. And I think just having that in your back pocket when you go in for the actual discussion is so helpful.
Yeah, oh, I love
I
that.
also think making it about you and not a comparison of your peers is really important. Make sure you're ready with, yeah, your self-promotion points of your accomplishments, the impact you've had, all of that. The minute you turn and you kind of are, well, so-and-so got, I heard so-and-so got this, like it just becomes more like complaining. So make sure it's very, again, objective, clear, and you're really owning the work that you've done.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you both for that. Those are great perspectives. I think we have some time for one more question. So, our last question that came in was any tips for having hard conversations, especially when finance can often be seen as the bad guy?
One of my mentors gave me this advice very early on in my career, and I think about it every time I have to have a hard conversation. Make it a nice sandwich. So you say, like, you lead with something really positive, shows that you understand where they're coming from. Give them the harder news in the middle, and then at the end, follow it up with, hey, how can I help you so that this isn't happening, or so that we don't run into this situation again, so that they are starting the conversation on a positive note and they're ending it on a positive note.
Yeah, love that. Nice sandwich. That's a great way to think about it. I love it. I love it.
I haven't heard of that one. That's a good one. I would say, again, you do have to say no a lot. You can still do it with the smile on your face and do it with empathy of the, hey, I know this sucks, but here's why. And I think making sure you explain the context for what you're saying no about or why, or whatever the tough feedback is really important. So they understand and they learn something from it, as opposed to them, it's something that they don't grow from, So but it also just requires practice. The more you do it, fortunately you get a little hardened and it's a little easier to do.
No, I love both of those answers. All right, well, thank you both ladies for taking the time to answer all those questions, and thank you audience for all the great questions. A lot of great questions in there. All right, so I know we are going to probably end up wrapping up a little bit early, so you'll have a little bit of time back in your day. But I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for coming, who asked questions, who's participating in the chat. But most importantly, a huge thank you to both you, Vicki and Desine, for being so open and generous with your stories and your insights today. So thank you so much for both of you for being here. I hope this session gave everybody that joined and listened in today something to walk away with, whether that's a fresh perspective, a bold move to try this week, or just a reminder that you're not navigating any of this alone. So again, this recording will be sent out in the next couple of days. Lastly, we just dropped in links to connect with this group here today on LinkedIn before you head out. So let's keep this amazing networking going and growing as women in the industry. So that said, thanks again for spending this time with us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.